All right. Good morning or afternoon, everyone out there. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Brad Weiner. I'll be helping host this webinar today on predictive models. Thank you again for being here. And it's 1 o'clock. At least it's 1 o'clock where I'm at. It's probably a different time where some of you are at, but we're just going to go ahead and get started. So I'd like to turn it over to my friend and colleague, John Foster, who will be the primary presenter today. Good afternoon, John.
Hey, how's it going, Brad?
Not too bad, man.
Yeah, good. So introduce myself a little bit. I'm a data analyst here at Capture. I also manage our suite of predictive models. So we're going to be focused today not so much on what we do in predictive modeling. Of course, we're going to use some examples from that, but just on how any school really should be using a predictive model to increase their ROI. So, Brad, you want to give us a definition of what would you say is a predictive model?
Sure. I think a lot of folks can think of this in a lot of different ways, but actually first I'll introduce myself really quickly. My name is Brad Weiner. I am one of the data scientists at Capture, and I work closely with John in helping build these models for colleges and universities all over the country. But to answer this question, a predictive model at its very core is basically an equation. And that equation uses inputs such as your data as well as contextual data, and it produces outputs. And those outputs are predictions on what is estimated to happen in some future. So that's basically what a predictive model is, and it can be used for a number of different reasons. But the main advantage, of course, is that it gives you some sense of what you don't know yet based on statistics. So that's the very high-level view of what a predictive model is. So, John, why don't you walk us through how it can help with ROI?
Well, the biggest thing that a predictive model can do for you is allocate your resources. So, in my mind, the biggest one of those resources that a model can help with is direct mail. Also, travel. Where are you sending your admissions officers? Who are they talking to when they get there? Which students are you sending phone calls or texts, targeted display ads? You have a limited budget, and which ones of these, which students are going to respond to these forms of communication? Also, the discretionary institutional aid. So whatever aid you have in your office that you can allocate to get students to come to your school. A predictive model can inform that decision so that you get more students enroll at your institution for the same amount of aid. So ultimately, a predictive model means you can predict the future. And what that means is, the earlier you know what your class is going to look like, the more options you have. You can allocate resources to hit your enrollment goal and adjust mid-cycle using the best information available. You got anything to add to that, Brad?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everyone who's in the enrollment space, I spent 14 or 15 years working on different campuses. You're always wondering, are you going to hit your class? You're wondering, are you going to hit your budget? And the way that a lot of schools do this is they kind of just use basic extrapolation. They assume that this year will look a lot like last year, or this year will look a lot like an average or something of the last 2 or 3 years. And in doing that, they are in their kind of mental state making a predictive model. What will the future look like? But that's not a particularly precise science. And so the type of predictive modeling that we're talking about is using a really robust data set and a really robust set of statistical tools and analyses in order to make actual probabilistic estimates on all of these things. But yeah, I think, John, if I were to just ask you, I mean, this is straight out of Back to the Future too, but like, if you knew or had a really good statistical estimate of what the future would hold, would you want that information?
Depends on the information, but if it was whether I was going to make my class, then yes.
What if it was on predicting future World Series and such?
Then I could predict the Florida Marlins are going to win that something from the Back to the Future.
Absolutely.
There's something in there.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I'd be rich like Biff if I could predict.
You'd be rich like Biff, exactly, man.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, predicting the future. equals a good thing, and helps you make decisions about the present. So one thing a predictive model can help with is predicting which students are most likely to apply. We call that an applicant model. So an applicant model, is going to give you a ranked list of all your prospects by how likely they are to apply, and it lets you know which students to target with your communications. And we found in our research that the students who are most likely to apply, based on our models, are also the ones that are most likely to be influenced by communication. So it's not just that they were going to apply anyway. They are receptive to your brand and are likely to be engaged in what you're offering. And ultimately, you want to use a model like this to spend very little money on people who aren't going to apply. Still send your automated emails out to them, your low-cost forms of communication, but once they raise their hand, they start to bounce back with you. Then you say, okay, let's bump this up a little bit. But for a large part of the class, spend very little money on them, and really spend your resources where they're going to have the most return.
So really quickly, for those of you who have joined us, if you'd like to ask a question or if you would like to touch base, feel free to hit us up in the GoToWebinar question section. We'd be happy to answer any of those. And we'll take care of those at the end. So thanks again for being here.
All right, so using an applicant model, let's talk about some examples of how that might give you a return on investment specific to direct mail. So here is kind of a hypothetical situation, definitely a hypothetical situation. You spend $1,000 to send 1,000 pieces at a buck a piece. From that, you're going to get maybe around, on average, a 0.8% response, or $122 you spent per response to that. And ultimately, picture 97,000 pieces of your mail in the trash. It's kind of a sad picture. Alternately, you could use your predictive model to spend half as much money on sending out half as many pieces, but get a 1.5% response, or $67 per response, about half the cost per response, and then allocate that $50,000 to higher value conversion activities. Let's look at were you going to say something, Brad?
Yeah, so I think that everyone can relate to this. If you just go out to your mailbox today and take a look at what's in there, I had an experience. Just to put a real world example on this, I buy clothes occasionally from Land's End. I buy T-shirts from them, and this isn't an endorsement of Land's End, but they just happen to be extremely good at this type of work. So a few weeks ago, I realized that I needed some new T-shirts. I went on their website, I logged in and looked at the previous things I had bought, and that obviously was captured in sort of a data signal for them, and very shortly thereafter, I received a medium thick catalog from them. Now, if I buy something from them, I might even get more emails or more information from them, but by and large, I get a ton of emails from this company. But if you open up your mail today and you look at all the junk mail, all of that stuff that you're going to walk straight from the mailbox to the trash is information that was poorly targeted to you. And using a good estimate and a good statistical model, you can reduce that waste and make your mailings that much more efficient, which is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, ultimately, out of that pile of the mail, a lot of it you're not going to be interested in, but there are a few pieces that really do resonate with you that you say, oh, okay, that is for me, and I'm interested. And that's what we're trying to do with our direct mail, right? Send it to the students who actually are going to be receptive and interested in learning what you have to offer.
While also using the rest of the money that you would have spent for pretty much anything else.
Right,
Every one of those pieces that ends up in the trash is a cost that you could have allocated to a higher value activity, as you already described.
Sure. Let's
say another example, John. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, more aggressive example. So same example there on the left, spending $100,000 on direct mail. On the right, maybe you really are aggressive on using your predictive model and send it to just the top 10,000 students. From there, on average, maybe you're going to get about a 3.6% response, or $28. You only spent $28 per response. And then, the best part is you still have $90,000 left. What are some things you might spend $90,000 on, Brad?
Yeah, so I don't know if you're asking for me personally.
Personally, I have some ideas myself.
Sure, but in terms of if I were a VP of enrollment or a
Sure.
dean of admissions or something like that, basically anything else, but some of those might involve more travel, which would allow your admissions personnel to get in front of students and actually talk to them. On-campus visit programs. And then if it's possible or if it's something that you're able to do, I am a huge fan of just cold hard cash in the form of some sort of institutional grant aid to students. Because there are a lot of factors that we've found are influential in terms of a student's interest in enrollment. Of course, one of the primary ones is how much it is going to cost.
Yeah.
So at every step along the way, if you can allocate your money toward things that make a bigger difference. I've never met the student out there, and our data doesn't support the fact that there are students out there who say, I got a postcard in the mail, and that's what caused me to enroll. That postcard triggers a sort of higher value activity, which triggers a higher value activity on throughout the cycle. So if you can avoid wasteful spending and spend it on stuff that actually works, that's where you want to go.
But ultimately, a scholarship, people make their decision based on how much money they're getting from a school, right? If you can give a student $1,000 more in scholarship instead of wasting it on direct mail, that's going to have an impact.
I would agree with that. Probably not 100% of the time, but I think overwhelmingly that is going to be the case.
Sure. So those are some hypothetical examples. Let's talk about some real world examples with some of our partner institutions. One is a small liberal arts college, and they used a predictive model to mail to the top 40% of students who were predicted as most likely to apply. They sent targeted banner ads to the top 20%, so half of that 40%, and then they reallocated more than 17 grand for other recruitment activities. From that campaign, they got 101 applicants in the next 2 months, and the students in that top 10%. So, we mailed to the top 40%, but that top 10%, they applied at 17 times the rate of the other targeted students. So they could have even been a little bit more aggressive and saved even more money if they just targeted that top 10%.
Sure. Hey, John, I got a question here, and it came in. I'm curious if you could just answer this. Obviously, these numbers are, the top 40%, the top 20%, and all that. How are those numbers actually operationalized? How does a school know who's in the top 40% or the top 20% or whatever? Sure.
In the models that we provide, and I'm sure other vendors do something similar, but we, rank the students from best to worst, really, and we put a ranking along with them, saying they're in the top 10, top 20, top 30, top 40%. And so, using one of our models, it would be very straightforward. You just take everybody that's in that top 40%, and that's who you send your direct mail to.
So you get like an Excel spreadsheet or something with the actual names and the students are ranked.
Yeah, our output is a spreadsheet like that that comes from an interface that we have built. And if you could either take that list and just take those 40%, it's got the mailing address on there, and just send that to your direct mailer, or you can join that back onto your CRM using the student ID, and then you can slice that up however you like. And so maybe you don't send it to exactly the top 40%, but you send it to the top 40% of students that are in certain states or who meet certain quality benchmarks or something like that.
Got it. Thanks.
Here's another real-world example from a larger school, a flagship public university. They use a predictive model to mail to the top 20% and got almost 1,300 applicants from that direct mail campaign in 2 months. And then also were able to reallocate more than $84,000 for other recruitment activities. So that's talking, we're talking about real return on investment at this point.
That is awesome.
84,000 is you can do some damage with that.
You sure can.
All right. So, I mean, if there's any other questions about predicting applicants, I'd be happy to address those. But otherwise, let's talk about predicting enrollments. So the way that we predict enrollments, and we do this in order to make the most accurate group level prediction we can, is predicting who's most likely to enroll out of your admitted pool. So from there, you can allocate your limited time and money on yield efforts, things like phone calls from students, faculty, alumni. These are things that our schools actually do. Handwritten notes, admissions yield travel, or targeted campus visit initiatives. Some schools offer things like free airfare to come visit their school, but obviously you can't offer that to everybody. So this tells you who are the students that you should be targeting that toward.
And I think when we're talking about enrollment, some of these yield efforts are really, really high touch, and they're really time consuming, and they're labor intensive. And so when you're talking about email, it seems like almost you could send in a theoretically infinite number of emails, basically, right? They cost
or you can send a bunch of direct mail. Yeah.
Exactly, but I think for folks who are thinking about predictive modeling when it comes to enrollment, you have to think about the actual fixed costs on which there's an absolute ceiling. So you have 10 students who are willing to make phone calls for a phone bank after, during your yield season. So we'll say like throughout March or whatever. And you have 10 students and they work, 3 hours a day, 4 days a week, and you do the math on that and they can make X number of phone calls. They can make no more than that number. And because of the fixed cost on that, you want to be very, very deliberate about who those phone calls go out to. And then we've worked with partners that have faculty or the provost or even the president make phone calls or write letters. And in some of those cases, that number just gets to be super, super narrow. And so without a way of directing those resources, you're just going to be flying blind or you're going to be wasting resources. Sure. So I think in the applicant model, it seems kind of amorphous because you're sending out hundreds of thousands of pieces potentially. But in the enrollment and the yield space, there's an absolute ceiling on what you're actually able to do.
Sure. And with applicants, we were talking largely about allocating money. But when you start talking about enrollment, it becomes more about you're allocating money, but you're also allocating your time. You have that limited window, maybe a month or two, when you can really make an impact on students. And so you have to really prioritize.
Absolutely.
So another thing that the enrollment model will do is, allow you to see the future. It'll, can tell you beforehand whether you're going to make your class. So if, if you're on track, it's a peace of mind to say, okay, we keep doing what we're doing and we're likely to make our class. But on the other hand, it's an early warning signal that, maybe we're behind and we need to take some extra effort. There were some of our partners this year that was the case. It was an early warning signal, and they really kicked it into high gear. Maybe admitted some more students, put in some extra time and effort and cost into making their class, and then ultimately did because they had that early warning signal. Otherwise, they would have kind of coasted along happily until June or July, and then realized, oh man, we missed our class. So yeah, so ultimately, what's the ROI on not getting yelled at by your president? If you been yelled at by a president or head of admissions, Brad?
I wouldn't. I think yelled at is maybe a strong way of putting it, but I've certainly been sternly talked to a couple of times for sure.
Not pleasant.
Yeah, and for a lot of folks who they're in many ways, I mean, their job and their success at the institution and their goals are dependent on the ability to make a class.
Sure.
You want every possible tool at your disposal in order to know if you're on target to do that.
Mm-hmm.
John, I was wondering if you could walk us through, the chart off to the right is from our predictive modeling suite. I was just wondering if you could kind of explain what these numbers are and the type of prediction that we've made over there for one of our partner institutions.
Sure. So this, we make the individual level predictions we've talked about. We also make this group level prediction. So this school, this is actually our faux state. what we call it, but has had 4,042 admitted students. We're predicting that 1,015 of them are going to enroll for a predicted yield of 25%. And for those students, they're looking to offer about 73 million in aid, and we're predicting that they're going to actually spend about 21 million in aid. Given their aid and also their tuition, we're predicting about a 17 million net revenue and a discount rate. So this gives a pretty good picture of what that class is likely to look like, given the students that they've admitted at this point in time.
And so, John, given the fact that you're able to predict, the net tuition revenue and the aid total, let's say that this school had a budget of $23 million.
Yeah.
What would your advice be based on this information? Because we know something that hasn't happened yet in theory. They've spent 21 million. They want to get a couple more students. They still have a couple million left to spend. What would you recommend doing here?
Well, if they have a model that's predicting financial aid, then I would say they should take that aid and allocate it to the students who is most likely to have an impact on. With a financial aid model like we offer, you know which students are most likely to respond to an increase in aid, and so you would offer the aid to those students and boost your class from there.
Sure. I think arguably you could also just tell them to award more aid.
Or just more aid, yeah.
They haven't gone over their budget yet, and they know that.
You can award more aid. You can also do it more precisely, and given the right kind of predictive model. But in general, yeah, if you award more aid, you're going to get more students.
Sure. So we'll pause there really quickly. I think we do have a question.
Okay.
So the question is about how algorithms might reinforce racism or other biases already in our system. What if part of our mission is to offer typically underserved populations? And that is a really good question. And there has been a lot of discussion about how algorithms at least can have the possibility of reproducing some sort of biases that exist in the data set.
Sure, they're not biased themselves, but they are built off the history, and if they're kind of built-in biases in the past, it is probably going to reflect those. I think there's actions you can take to counteract that, right? So I mean, if you know that in the past your school hasn't enrolled many students of color or certain groups or however it is, I think then you can target those students a little bit more, and a predictive model can tell you out of that group which are the students that are most that are going to be the best return on investment. So there still does take a human in there to kind of break a history of bias.
And I think that you hit the nail on the head. The actual question is, what do you do with a predictive model if part of the mission is to offer education to underserved populations? What this will help you do is you could segment out whatever populations you believe are underserved and still use your resources in the most efficient way to meet whatever your institutional goals might be. So some institutions want geographic diversity, some might be interested in socioeconomic diversity, and you could certainly as you mentioned, sort of slice and dice whatever population you want in order to allocate your resources in order to meet that goal.
Sure.
But that's a terrific question.
Yeah, it's been an interesting subject of conversation recently.
Absolutely. So while we're on the topic, let's talk a little bit more about aid and the institutional aid. Go for it, John.
Yeah, just ultimately, to be a little bit saucy about it, you're giving aid to the wrong students, and you're giving the wrong amount of aid to the right students, and ultimately, your awarding strategy is inefficient. So, Brad, you put in this matrix here. Explain the difference between a matrix and what we were talking about.
Sure. So I think. a lot of institutions, they work off of some sort of grid, and it's um, it's kind of a flow chart. If a student has this and this, then they get this, and that makes a bunch of sense because there's a lot of complexity in the world, and this kind of condenses all of the possible options into just a small number of buckets. Maybe 16 buckets or 20 buckets, or maybe for an ambitious school a little bit more than that. But in statistical parlance, basically every time you crunch people together or you bin people, you end up removing variance. You make everybody within a particular bin look like they're all the same. And we all know that every single student has has different needs and has a different sort of price sensitivity and has different interests in attending your institution. And so,
right. So every student with a ACT of a 29 and a GPA of 3.8 is not necessarily the same student.
There might be hundreds or even thousands of students in that bucket.
Yeah.
And so by lumping everybody together, you are inherently making inefficient decisions because you're not accounting for all of the differences within those budgets. And the inefficiency in that is that you are probably giving too much money to students who are highly likely to enroll already.
Right.
Or you're giving too much money to students who are just never going to come. I mean, they're so unlikely to enroll that that it's really not worth your time or your effort. But there's always going to be that group of students in the middle, and by using a predictive model to allocate your resources, you can sort of most efficiently find the students who are going to be sensitive to a change in their institutional aid award. So there might be that student that really, really, really wants to come there, but just an extra $500 or $1,000 or $1,500 would really make the difference. And that's where you begin to see that variance spread out, and you begin to award at the individual level so that it's optimized. It's as efficient as possible. Every dollar is going to maximize that student's likelihood of enrollment.
Yeah. So here's a screenshot, an example of what you're talking about. A screenshot from one of our financial aid models, and in this case, we were predicting again that they were going to get 1,015 students. So here, they used the tool to tweak and adjust it according to their needs, and they increased 100 offers, decreased a different 100 offers, and ultimately, the result here is that we're predicting they're going to spend $46,000 less in aid, get $116,000 more in predicted net revenue, and so spending $46,000 less in aid and getting 2 more students. So ultimately, you could spend the same amount of aid and get more students, or you can spend less aid and get the same amount of students, depending on what the needs of your school are.
Sure, and I think this is a point that we should dwell on for a second, because a lot of folks out there are so familiar with the way that aid is currently awarded, and a lot of institutions, sure, they vacillate back and forth. It's a pendulum where the board or the president says, we want to grow our class, and therefore we should spend more money to do it. So everybody marches to those orders, so to speak, for a while. And then the tuition discount rate gets a little bit too high, or you're spending a little bit too much, or your net tuition revenue is a little bit too low. And so a new board or a new president comes in and they say, we can't keep discounting our tuition. We would rather have a smaller class if it costs us less. Yeah. And it seems as though people are willing to have sort of forced a false dichotomy. You either have to go the entrenchment route, or you have to go the spending and growth route. And what we're kind of illustrating here is just because of that inefficiency in the way that awards are set up, that it is possible to have both. You can, in some cases, not to use the ridiculous phrase, but you can have your cake and eat it too. With, more students for a lower cost.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about, the general theme here of return on investment, if you are getting a greater return in terms of net tuition revenue on less investment of financial aid, I mean, you're impacting both sides of that equation. You're getting a serious return on investment there.
No question.
All right, so that those are the main ways. And just to summarize a little bit of how we see that you should use a predictive model to increase your ROI by allocating your resources, such as communication or time more efficiently. To spend your financial aid better, and ultimately to target the right students is how you get a return on investment from a predictive model. We try to keep it kind of general here, not make it too salesy, but just to be informative about how to use a predictive model. But we do think that our suite of predictive models are really the best ones out there. Using a more advanced approach, getting better results. So if you'd like a demo of what we have to offer, we would love to do that and talk with you one-on-one and give a demo of how we go about predictive modeling, as well as how it might fit into your campus environment. So if you schedule that meeting in the next 2 weeks, we'd be glad to do that for free, as well as if you want to engage our services within the next month, we'll be happy to give a discount on that.
Yep. And the product that we work with, it's called Envision. It was designed in-house, and it uses what's called machine learning technology to make predictions. So we're a bit on the front edge of this in terms of the data science, and we're really proud of what we can offer. So hopefully we can show you how accurate we can be, and have that discussion with you.
I think the other thing that we offer that's unique is that financial aid modeling. The way that we walked it through there, that of allocating individual aid to specific students, is I'm pretty sure we're the only ones doing anything like that. So if you like more information on that, we would love to talk to you more about it. And then if you want to try us out, we also are glad to try that out. If you give us a data set, we'll walk through, give you a free trial to see how it works using our methodology, and we're also glad to compare it against whatever predictive modeling service you're currently using, because we're confident that we're going to come out being more accurate. So if you have questions or feedback, or want to schedule a demo or a free trial, here's our email addresses. I think you can also respond to the webinar invite, and we'll get in touch with you from there.
So John, there is one question, and
okay,
it's someone asking about financial aid, and
sure.
This person is curious how the aid model works with regard to like Pell Grants and federal and state aid.
Right.
So can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So it is not really taking those into consideration. Those are set aside because the Pell Grants, the state, federal aid, that is kind of fixed what you're going to give, right? This is specific to what the institution has some discretion over awarding. So that's may not be the entire aid package, but that portion of it where they can say, here's some discretionary scholarship money that we can award how we see best fit. And that's what it's talking about, allocating more efficiently.
Got it. So it doesn't take into account federal and state aid, right?
Yeah, that's going to be just off to the side. That's not really played into it.
Got it. Very good. I think that's what we've got for you today. If I'm checking and it doesn't appear as if there are any other questions, we will be sending a follow-up email after this, and then we'll also have a recording of this. If you do have any questions about this or about anything, we're always happy to have that conversation with you. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate your time.
All right, everybody, have a good day. Thanks for joining us.